Hello and welcome. My name is Shayla Turk, and I'm the Lead Access and Wellness Counselor here at Ashford University. I will be the host of this session, Instructional Priorities, How a Pandemic Shows Us What's Really Important. Microphones will be muted for this presentation, but I encourage you to post questions and comments in the chat. Also, keep your eye on the chat for a link to helpful session feedback survey. Now, I'm pleased to introduce to you Morgan Johnson, Associate VP, and Dr. Teresa Kuruc, Director of Faculty Support and Development. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shayla. We were just talking before the session today, actually, that it's really beneficial for us to have Shayla here because I think a lot of the points we're going to hit in our presentation specifically talks about the intersection of academic affairs and student affairs. So Shayla, we appreciate you already. I think I know everyone looking at the participant list, but in case not, as Shayla said, Morgan Johnson, I'm the Associate Vice President for the Center of Excellence in Teaching and Learning here at Ashford.
And my name is Teresa Kuruc, and I'm the Director of Faculty Support and Development at Ashford, which is a part of the CEDL. So I work very closely with Morgan.
And it'd be great for folks that are joining us, if you want to post in the chat who you are, where you're from, if you are from another institution, what department you work in. I think one of the, I think both great things and challenging things about our presentation today is we're still in the midst of a pandemic. So I think a lot of what we're going to be talking about and presenting is reflection on how we have approached our support to faculty and students over the last 9 months. That being said, it's not over yet. So everything is very much in motion and we're learning as we go. It would be so great to hear too from other groups, especially if you are from another institution, what you're doing and how you're addressing some of the challenges that we're going to be talking through. So the session today definitely is going to be a reflection, as I mentioned, on how we've partnered across the institution to address really challenges that were unexpected for 2020 and try to use either existing or put in place new support systems for our faculty and students. We're going to talk about several technologies that have helped us to do that and specifically to help us scale what we need to do for some of this programming. And then again, we're hoping for lots of participation from our audience so we can really get a temperature check on how things are going, how folks are feeling, and what would be next steps that everyone would recommend based on what you're experiencing right now. First, I think for many of our participants, this is something you're feeling and working through every single day with our students. Number one, the health and wellness of our students is the top priority. And I think what we've seen over the last 9 months naturally is we have, students that have been directly impacted by COVID. If they're not directly impacted, they have family members that they're caring for. Many of our students, are in a household where they're required to or have been required to quarantine, or their children have, or their spouse potentially has. So there's been a lot of unique health and wellness challenges that our faculty and staff are working through with students every single day. Additionally, I think the financial stress and impact, right, that has both an impact on their wellness and health, but also just their personal living situation. And so some of the topics and themes that we're seeing with our students are not new to our student population, as you all know, in the support that you provide students every single day. That being said, I think, Teresa, right, we were in a presentation a couple weeks ago, and Rachel Orlansky, who's our director in student affairs, was talking about, while we're all in COVID, COVID is not equal for all. And so what we're seeing in particular in this area is we have students who've lost their jobs or students who have maybe been cut back in hours. And on the opposite end of that, maybe students who are working overtime but don't have the childcare they need. So the financial spectrum of impacts on students is great. From a technology perspective, I think the number one thing we've heard in terms of impacts from our students are, number one, the place that they were potentially employed has closed. And so they're working from home full time, or they just no longer have access to the technology to connect to their classroom, or at least not on a regular basis. So, that's been definitely a challenge. Again, child and dependent care, that's a theme that continuously has come up. We're so blessed to have our Department of Education and Liberal Arts really help support the community through the Dog Ate My Mask series that they hosted earlier in the year when the school year was starting, and the school year was starting in very different ways depending on the region, city, and area you lived. Today, we are obviously still seeing impacts with our students with child and dependent care on a regular basis. My children, for example, are going to school from home in the morning and then in school physically in the afternoon. And we were just notified the last couple of days that there's been positive cases at their grade school. So we know that our students are going through the ups and downs of this on a daily basis, and that has very different impacts. From a professional perspective, I think one of the most frequently used stats that we've seen is many folks have lost their full-time work. Specifically, though, this has impacted women in the workplace. So lots of women either have lost their positions because of the employer or because they had to stay home for childcare or to take care of other family members. So we're hearing that as a theme with our students, to no surprise. I think the other piece too, right, is we have a lot going on in 2020 that are impacting our students that are intersecting with COVID, specifically natural disasters and severe weather that we're experiencing across the country, and then social unrest. And so those pieces add additional stress on top of an already stressful time. And I know I'm not sharing anything that everyone isn't already experiencing, but I thought it was good just to kind of set the stage for here's where our students are this year, and kind of here's where we've come from a framework to try to best determine how to support them both in the classroom and outside of the classroom. Now I'll hand it over to Teresa to talk a little bit about our faculty impacts.
Thank you. Of course, the faculty impacts look and feel very similar to students. But what is important to consider, especially in the context of Ashford, is our unique faculty population in the sense that we have around 2,300 online adjunct faculty, many of whom are practitioners in addition to scholars and teachers, which means that the financial and professional and child/dependent care factors are playing a big role in their ability to accept courses, to finish them out. And at the end of the day, all of our faculty really want to do their best to support our students. So we have heard from our associate faculty pool about health issues, whether that be illness themselves or caring for a sick family member. Faculty who no longer have their usual full-time jobs. And like Morgan was saying earlier, on the flip side, faculty, for example, who work in the healthcare industry, who work in law enforcement, first responders, public health professionals whose full-time jobs have increased in scope and magnitude over the past few months. This has influenced their ability to perform classroom activities, engage with students, accept course invitations. And so much of what we have done over the past few months is to consider the intersections of faculty and student impacts and use that to inform a lot of the programs and initiatives, which we're going to describe here in a second, to help both populations out.
Yeah, Teresa, before I go to the next slide, one thing I did want to note that we didn't add, but for those that might not be as familiar with our model, I think the benefits that our model have brought are some of the items that we might have be including on this list that we're not, that other institutions are feeling, are things like, they don't have services or did not have services online to begin with for students or faculty. They weren't able to scale curriculum quickly in a quality way, or technology for that matter. So all of those pieces, because we had in place, we really have been able to focus on those direct individual impacts and then create services and programming around those. So I know we've talked about it, in our town halls and as a community several times, that we are thankful for having some of those pieces not just in place, but in place in a way that we could scale it easily or make modifications based on the impacts of COVID.
And of course, all of our intentions are geared toward ensuring that student learning continues, that our students, faculty, and staff feel supported. We've heard from many students over the course of the past few months about individual instructors who make credit for their being able to continue in school and manage all of the external stressors on top of their goal to get their degree. Morgan, you can go to the next slide. So what we've seen from students, and that we're aiming to support faculty to negotiate in the classroom, are student-initiated requests for support. For example, a student discloses an illness or financial hardship or adjusted work schedule that has impacted their ability to submit assignments on time, or has impacted their ability to finish a course in the standard time frame. We're advising via policies and faculty and student support systems how to manage those situations. We also are fortunate at Ashford to have several robust tools that allow both student support staff and faculty to get an easy, quick glance of which students potentially are at risk for not meeting academic expectations. And there are several sessions later that you can enjoy, which we'll share in a bit, that articulate more about these tools. Formerly, we use Civitas IFF, Inspire for Faculty. Currently, we use a tool called Signals, which is available both to faculty and academic advising, that helps anyone supporting a student see how they're doing in terms of submitting assignments on time, responding to communication, accessing course materials, even accessing the classroom, which gives us an extra view on top of what a student might disclose him or herself. And of course, the student advising and academic staff work very closely to communicate what they're seeing in the classroom with each other and what they're hearing from students, so that all parties who support students are ready to act when necessary.
Thanks, Teresa. So just for context for the group, from a university perspective, I think one of the first pieces we looked at was policy exception. And this was coming both from an internal desire to make modifications where we were able to, but also from guidance that we were receiving from external regulatory bodies that were providing institutions guidance both in accrediting areas as well as just the Department of Education. So anywhere that we received guidance externally that we were able to make exceptions, we absolutely did. One of the challenges in looking at some of that external guidance was it mostly was for programs that were going online that had traditionally been face-to-face. So if your program at an institution already was at distance, there really weren't a lot of exceptions that were being made from some of these bodies. That being said, I think a lot of our internal policies that were not or have not been developed around external regulations, that's where we spent our time with first, to identify, what policies potentially had the most impact on students and faculty in the classrooms, and where were we able to make exceptions. And we're going to talk about some of those specific exceptions here in a little bit, and then the impact that that's had. Additionally, we wanted to connect students to resources as quickly as possible. And this is, you know, in referencing Shayla earlier, our student affairs team really is incredible. And because there were already several programs in place, they were able to very quickly address student needs coming in that faculty members were receiving. And I just want to give a shout out kind of to 3 programs in particular. The helpline, which all of you are probably very familiar with, as it's, you know, a go-to for faculty on a regular basis. That's where we were able to send students to if they were having COVID-related impacts. The helpline then was able to offer students, based on their current situation, a couple options internally, which included a fund that we had to assist with emergency financial situations called the Badger Fund. And this fund was left by one of the an Ashford alumni. So it was already in place. There was already a process set up to make sure students had resources. So that was extremely helpful in the spring. And then the Home Stretch program, which is a program in place to help connect students towards the end of their program with computers if they don't have technology or there's an issue and they don't have funding to get technology. So all 3 of those programs were very quickly able to assist students and faculty based on needs being expressed. Additionally, as you all know, Student Affairs also helps students find resources in their local community. So that connection was being made very quickly for individuals as cities and states were coming out with specific programming and resources. Next, there was an expansion of co-curricular programming. We're going to talk a little bit about that specific to faculty. But again, I also want to shed some light on the fact that our Career and Alumni Services team did an incredible job getting services for career and employer, for student and employer connections set up very quickly. We've had 2 virtual career fairs this year, which those are our first as a university. And then just all of the programming they've done through webinars and one-on-one support has been you know, an expansion of already existing services that they've provided. Many of our faculty at the beginning of the pandemic also were nervous about students feeling that lack of community that we're all really feeling right now, but specifically potentially with situations where they were feeling isolated. They weren't able maybe to connect face-to-face with their normal communities. And so wanted to know what could we do. And so we've definitely seen growth in some of our communities as an institution, specifically our social media communities where we have program and very specific, I think, clubs and organizations that have sites where students can get together. There have been events that have been held through these. So it's been incredible to see kind of the growth there, you know, thanks to all of the teams that support those organizations. And then last but certainly not least, at an institutional level, I think there's just been a focus on continuous communication. You know, Pat Ogden and our communication team set up an external facing website that really housed all communications for all audiences throughout COVID that we continue to add to as new information became available. But we've just continuously tried to communicate all of the programming and services that we're discussing with students and faculty in a way that made sense. So you know, that's definitely been a core focus at an institutional level. Something that we hear Dr. Swenson talk about on a regular basis is the impact our faculty have on students, specifically student success and retention. And so we knew at the beginning that no matter what programs we put in place or kind of what services we provided, it was going to be key to connect faculty and their students throughout this to make sure that everyone felt like they had the resources they needed to be successful. So we've mentioned a little bit about policy exception. Flexibility was a theme that came through from day one. You know, we had students absolutely that I think, you know, Teresa was talking a little bit ago about some of our frontline students and the impacts that they had. And that largely was based on scheduling changes, right? Our students are very used to having a normal schedule where they would, you know, have their professional life, their home life, and then work on school. And that, you know, was completely disrupted with COVID. And so, you know, one of the things that we looked at immediately was our attendance policy. Can we make exceptions to our attendance policy, or are we required to keep it as is? The attendance policy is probably one area that we are already pretty flexible in. And so we did make a determination that we were not going to make any attendance changes. If there were exceptions that came through, our requests for exceptions in very extreme instances, especially when COVID first hit, we absolutely looked at that, but our attendance policy did not change overall. Another piece we looked at was our universal late policy and just general, encouragement of faculty flexibility. And I think Teresa is going to talk a little bit about this in a minute, but this was an area that naturally as an institution, we've set that universal late policy, and we see everyday faculty using different late policies with, an abundance more of flexibility, given that students are staying, in compliance with the course attendance policy. So, we encourage faculty flexibility throughout and beyond, really, right? This is not COVID related. We know our students are impacted every single day in different ways, but this definitely became a focus of a lot of our conversations related to COVID flexibility. Final grades, this I think, and then incompletes really kind of go hand in hand. We looked closely at external impacts if we did not have final grades submitted on time, as we've established as an institution. And so there are specific groups, the Air Force being one of them, and some of these outside bodies that we are reporting student grades to. So there is a need to be timely in our reporting of those, and those timelines truly did not change. It's one of the things that we closely tracked with some of the exceptions that were coming out from external agencies. So as it related to our internal processes, what we could look at was the incomplete process in terms of eligibility and timeline. And so that's where you're seeing still today that a lot of the requirements that we have put in place as an institution for students to even be eligible to request an incomplete essentially have been eliminated, or there's an exception in place at this point based on COVID related impacts. And so we will continue to review that and make sure that it's not having a negative impact on students. I think my next slide includes some of the data. So this is one area that we've seen faculty leverage extensively with students, because what we often hear from students is that they need a little bit more time. They don't necessarily want to take an academic break. They do want to be successful in their course, but because of all of these other stressors and impacts in their life, they do need more than the traditional 5 or 6 week period that their course allows. So we have seen an increase, and if Brian Aylward's on, thanks for constantly tracking this data for us. So we have seen an increase since March in our incomplete requests. Specifically right now, our registrar's office is looking to identify, based on those requests that are coming in, what is the outcome for students? So are we seeing an increase in successful or an increase in successful completion for students, or no impact, or are we potentially seeing a negative impact? I think one of the things and a theme in all of the work that has been around these programs and exceptions is we don't want to harm students either. So we don't want to put off what potentially could be an inevitable failure of a course either. So before making really, I think, any determinations on is this an opportunity for us to revise our incomplete policy, or what does the future look like with this exception in general? We're hoping to look at that data to better determine what the impact has been on students. Teresa, I feel like I'm talking so much, so feel free to jump in if you want to.
I can jump in now for sure. All of our communication with faculty and our efforts to support students is focused on care and compassion. And so slides that follow this are discussing programs for faculty continuing education and support in relation to the pandemic and all of the upheaval we've experienced this year. And a lot of those learning opportunities address language, tone, and proactive communication. We understand that in normal circumstances, we always want to have high expectations of our students for academic excellence and to ensure the most productive learning opportunities possible. And in this moment, that must be coupled with empathy and compassion. So Morgan, if you want to go to the next slide, we can talk about some of the outreach, and faculty support. You definitely should jump into this one too, because I know this was a lot of effort on your part to increase or encourage increased faculty outreach to students who expressed impact from COVID or who were recently returning from a break because of these impacts. Of course, there were ongoing announcements about the status of the institution, policy exceptions, resources for students and faculty. But on top of that, there were additional check-ins for targeted students who we knew were struggling. For example, we partnered with academic advising and student records to have a clear understanding of which students were returning from academic leaves for whatever reason, so that we could connect them with their new faculty in their first course back to make sure that they felt welcomed, encouraged, and supported as they continued on their journey. Morgan, I'll pause here if you want to give some more detail about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that, Rachel, thanks for your comment in the chat. To build on that point, Teresa, we definitely have been doing since COVID weekly meetings with our student advising leadership. And it's not exclusive to student advising. It absolutely includes members of the registrar's office, members of our enrollment teams, to kind of talk through, what we're seeing, what we're feeling. And a lot of these interventions came out of those conversations specifically. So we naturally saw a spike in our academic leave requests from students, which allows a student to take a break from courses up to 45 days. Upon that return, really they were potentially dealing with a very different world than they were experiencing before when they were in the classroom. And so we did ask faculty for a number of months to reach out to those students that were returning from breaks, not only with information about how the faculty member could support them, but some of the specific programming that we've mentioned about connecting students with our career and alumni services and our and some of the I think social and student orgs that we're definitely putting in more time and effort to connect students. So all great collaboration. Rachel, to your point, I think there definitely is an opportunity for enhanced and continued collaboration as we see faculty and advisors work together more closely to work through student needs. So yeah, thanks for making that point.
And as we, of course, aim to support students, a big part of the student experience is what happens in the classroom. And we know, of course, that our faculty were going through the same challenges that our students are and needed assistance in various ways, in large part to understand where to focus their efforts in terms of meeting the course requirements our institution has set for faculty activity in the classroom. I'm going to turn this over to Morgan to round out these details, and I'm going to run over to our next keynote presentation, which I invite all of you to when this is over. Thank you so much for coming. And I know Morgan provided both of our contact information at the end of the presentation, so please feel free to email me if you would like to continue this conversation.
Thanks, Teresa. And I know we just have a couple more minutes, so I'm sure Shayla's hoping to hop in very quickly. So, but we are just about to the end. Really, we've been evaluating and reviewing student feedback. You've seen some of the quotes throughout the presentation that we've seen come through in our end of course surveys. We're continuing to monitor that, as well as other surveys where students are providing just general feedback on their experience and their current situation. We're always looking to leverage our institutional data in new and different ways. And so some of the interventions previously mentioned were based on data points that we were able to identify through our analysis to say, where are we seeing spikes in different metrics, and then how do we best address that? So the most important thing then is, how do we scale access to that institutional data? And that's what we've really been working towards with a lot of our work around signals and getting faculty access to data quickly and in a way that is easily accessible at the student level. And last but certainly not least, because I know a lot of our FSDA team members are on the presentation today, our faculty support and consultants and coaches have been doing very specific outreach through this time to all of our faculty to make sure they have what they need and that we are communicating updates on a regular basis in different ways. And I'm going to we will make this available, this deck to everyone later. I will also share that there are a few presentations coming up that touch on topics Teresa and I discussed in much more depth. Today at 11 is interpreting signals. So hopefully you all will go and see Signals 2.0 and all the great features that are coming out in the next iteration. And then there's another, this work-life balance topic is obviously key and critical to our students at 1 today. And then tomorrow we have members of student affairs talking about impacts on students and faculty from a student affairs lens. So really excited about all of these presentations. So thank you all so much for attending our session today. I wish we had 30 more minutes, but we don't. So thank you for all your support, Shayla, and thanks everyone.
Thank you, Morgan, and thanks so much to Teresa as well and the audience for your participation today in this session. So much amazing information squeezed into that small time. We hope you'll take a moment to complete the brief feedback survey at the link posted in the chat, and I encourage you to attend the next featured presentation. It is from 11 to 12. Dr. Michael Burns, Director of Career Readiness, Department of Communication Studies at Texas State San Marcos. Remember that you can access all presentations via the TLC online event page on Eventbrite and can continue the conversation and engage with our conference participants on social media by using the hashtag AUTLC. Enjoy the rest of TLC and thank you so much. Again, thank you, Morgan. Take good care.